What is up, everybody? Welcome into Shout. It has been 4 long days since our last show, and I was hoping to get back sooner, but I was dealing with a little bit of the flu, which was absolutely horrible on the way back from Kansas City. Just completely floored me for a couple days. So we're back. We're back in the saddle. I was down at One Bills Drive today. Talked to Brandon Beane. Talked to Sean McDermott. We're going to get into all of that on today's show. He's Ryan Talbot. I'm Matt Parrino. We're brought to you, as always, by Topps Friendly Markets.
That's right. And right now, Topps has big game savings going on, Matt. Buy two, get three free. Lay's. You have Tostitos, Fritos, Doritos, Cheetos, all those O's. And you also have Ruffles. Buy two, get three free. Coca-Cola products. Buy two, get four free. 12 packs of cans or 8-pack bottles. Buy two, get four free for Pepsi products. That is in the 6-packs. BOGO deals on Cheetos and original pizza logs, regular pepperoni flavor, that is, chicken wing flavor, and apple pie flavor. And, maybe my favorite, you can get some Haas avocados, 10 for 10. Head over to Topps and get your big game savings.
I'm a big avocado guy. I have avocado with breakfast almost every morning. So 10 for 10. That's a pretty good deal.
Great deal.
All right, Ryan, there's a lot to get into from Sunday's game still. We heard a lot of from Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott about the vision going into this season. I want to talk about, first off, my big takeaway from today. And I think that there is a solid fundamental understanding that the Bills know they need to get a difference maker on defense. Like I asked Brandon Beane about it. I asked Sean McDermott about it. McDermott said philosophically, he believes you need 2 to 3 difference makers on both sides of the ball. He said that. Not to say that he's saying if they have that on the roster, if they don't, he didn't go that far. Brandon Beane, when asked about it, said, listen, I'd love to get at Chris Jones, but people aren't necessarily willing to give them away. And, one of the things that I'm starting to look at here as we craft the plan, at least the shout plan for the Bills this offseason, is maybe a big-time move for a Max Crosby, a guy that you can – say week in and week out, going into games, defense or offenses have to game plan against this player. That person didn't exist for the Bills, obviously.
Right.
Going into this game against the Chiefs, that's something that I think they need to spend the offseason figuring out a way to bring in that player. I think while we were complimentary of it at the time, the all-in move on Von Miller at 32 years old, in hindsight, based on what he had done in the immediacy of that move, 13 seconds, what they needed to get over the hump, it made a lot of sense. But I think they need to go younger. Crosby's only going to be 29 next season. Give yourself a little bit more of a window. But I don't think that there's any way to kind of parse this thing up. They need a difference maker on defense, like the Kansas City Chiefs have, and like a lot of these AFC powers have. Trey Hendrickson in Cincinnati, Will Anderson in Houston. The elite teams in the AFC have a difference maker at quarterback and on the defensive side.
And you mentioned a name that I would try to pursue, Trey Hendrickson. I know he's a little bit older, but he's coming off of a 17.5 sack season. The Bengals pretty much said they would love to pay everyone, but they don't necessarily have the finances to do so. Hendrickson last year at some point requested a trade, and it just never happened. He seems like a player that the Bills could obtain. Now, Max Crosby would be much better of the two names. But the problem with Max Crosby is, are the Raiders going to be willing to deal him? I get that they are in a rebuild, but Pete Carroll might say, you know what, I want to keep this guy. He's a franchise player. He is a player that can help bring some young kids along or young players along. It's going to come up to whether or not he wants to move on from Crosby. Crosby hasn't come out and demanded a trade or anything, which also lessens the likelihood of him possibly being moved, although, again, he would be my number one target if he's available. The Browns have already said Myles Garrett is not going to be traded, so you can kind of take him off the board. So, if you're looking for someone that I think is available, Hendrickson is the guy, 17.5 sacks this past season. Deion Dawkins had this great clip where he was talking about how that's his favorite player to go against. From an old interview, just kind of, it was a nice coincidence to hear him say that, because he's a player that always brings his A game, great pass rush arsenal. And I agree, though. You do need 2 or 3 of those types of players on both sides of the ball. Going back, watching that Chiefs game, Mahomes is getting the ball out extremely fast, though. That's one of those games where who knows how often they would have been able to get home on him. I do think if you have a guy like Hendrickson, like Max Crosby, where they're winning immediately off the ball, maybe they would have been able to get home. The Bills didn't have that. They're still not getting enough from Rousseau. Von Miller does not look the part anymore. That looks like a bad contract that they could move on from potentially with some, post June 1st designation or whatever may have you. But the Bills definitely have to add a playmaker or two to that side of the ball.
Yeah, the post June 1st cut number, according to Over the Cap, is coming in at $17.5 million. And to me, that's the move that you make, and then you start to work on a potential trade, because like maybe something happens around the deadline or around the draft where you can move something. I know that bringing in Pete Carroll is not a move for the future. So I do agree with you that I don't know if Vegas is necessarily going to be eager to move on from Crosby, but let's be honest, depending on who they get at the quarterback position, I just don't see a way that in that division you're going to convince Max Crosby that this is a win now scenario. And he's got 1 or 2 years left of his superpowers. And I think he's going to probably want to maybe push it a little bit to come to a place where he can compete for a championship. And so that's the move that I would make. Thank you for, but again, to your point, they got to be willing to make the move. So much to get to here on this episode. Thank you for watching. Thank you for watching all season long.
Yes.
This has been a tremendous year of growth for the Shout Podcast. Everybody that tunes into the live episodes, the audio episodes. I didn't want this episode to go by without thanking everybody for making us a part of your Bills rotation, because I know that there's so many options in the Bills podcasting game. We really appreciate that. All right, let's get to Amari Cooper next. I want to get to let's actually go rapid fire, and we'll start with Cooper. I want to get to Kincaid. I want to get to Coleman. Brandon Beane had commentary on all three of these guys, and we learned that Amari Cooper, one doctor suggested that he shut it down for the season with that wrist injury, and he played through it. And I think that kind of really does show you or glean a little bit more into why the production wasn't there for him after the injury. And I think it maybe changes the math a little bit on whether or not you probably want the Bills to pursue bringing him back next season. But I think Brandon Beane is correct in saying that he doesn't regret the trade. I think it did change the way teams had to try to set up to defend this team. And other guys did eat in certain spots. I think the Amari Cooper deal, although you won't look back on it like a Rasul Douglas deal which made this great, immediate contributions. He was turning the ball over, all those kinds of things. I do think Amari Cooper had a positive impact on this offense.
Oh, 100%. Even if it seemed like he was a decoy at the end of the season, we now know why. He didn't just fall off of a cliff talent-wise. It was because he was dealing with a serious wrist injury, which, that hampers you in terms of the physicality, getting off the line, the hand fighting that you generally see take place with receivers and cornerbacks, and just catching the ball in general, especially from a quarterback like Josh Allen. So now it makes a lot more sense as to why he wasn't putting up major stat lines, why he wasn't on the field in certain downs and distances in big games. And it does change the math a little bit based on everything he said this year about the stats don't matter. I've never been on a team that's made it this far. Winning is everything. If he's willing to take a team-friendly deal, because, again, the Bills aren't going to be big spenders in free agency, and they have some their own guys that they need to take care of as well, I would gladly bring a player like that back because of what he's done in the past, what he can still do. Is he in his prime anymore? No, absolutely not. But you know that if he's healthy, he's going to be a lot better than what you saw on the field from him in those post-wrist injury. And I think that a full offseason with this offense, with Joe Brady, with Josh Allen, would really pay dividends for Cooper and the Bills.
It was interesting that when asked about Keon Coleman, Brandon Beane said that there were very direct and honest conversations at the end of the year. And one of the reasons he mentioned that is because he said that was a little bit disappointed with post-injury Keon Coleman. I think both McDermott and Beane saw where he was kind of trending before the injury. McDermott went as far as to say he had a dominant performance physically as a receiver and a blocker against the Seattle Seahawks. I mean, you remember that Tariq Woolen highlight reel touchdown grab, and then obviously the big block where he kind of pointed to the guy. He was kind of coming into the top form of the season for him, and the injury happens the next week, and he's never the same when he comes back. And I think that there might be a little bit of, you know, recency panic bias when it comes to Kyer Elam, who had some bright moments his first season and obviously didn't sustain that over the course of the next couple. If you're the Bills, you sit down Keon Coleman and say, listen, this is what we liked. This is what we didn't in the second half of the season. And you really need to drive it home this offseason in terms of getting more improvement, getting the body more physically ready, working on the separation factor. That was something that Sean McDermott specifically mentioned. They need to go out and find guys that can get separation. And Keon Coleman was among the worst in the league at getting that. So I think he's going to hear some of the noise this offseason. He's a very driven kind of guy. And I think for as much as he came in and was like this super big buzzy PR storyline for the Bills, you remember the jacket and the cookies and all that fun stuff from the draft time, I think a little bit of it was probably overwhelming for a young kid. And I expect year 2 to be even more significant for Coleman. So if they don't bring back Cooper necessarily and they decide to go out and get another receiver in the draft, I don't know if I have such a big problem with that. Is this crazy to say that I think Mac Hollins is more important of a piece to keep than Cooper because of what I think you should expect year 1 to year 2 jump for Coleman?
No, I don't think that's crazy from the Hollins Cooper perspective, especially from the standpoint of the money difference between the two in terms of what it would cost to bring back Hollins versus potentially what it costs to bring back Cooper. You know that Hollins is an outstanding blocker. You know that he's showing up in these big moments, making plays, and he's also a special teams guy. So he checks a lot of boxes, and you need players like that because, again, you need those special teams units, and he can do that. And we saw against McDuffie what he did in the AFC Championship with the touchdown and getting the big play down to the 2. He really showed himself well in his first season with the Bills. When it comes to Keon Coleman, you've said a lot of it. The growth from year 1 to year 2. Rookies go through so much pre-draft, whether it's those, the games like the Senior Bowl or the Shrine Game or the Hula Bowl. Then they're meeting with teams and they're traveling and they're not doing probably their normal workout routine and regiment and things like that. Coleman has all offseason now to work on building up his strength, working on improving his game as a blocker, working on that physicality aspect of his game. It's not the same as the year 1 to year 2 leap that we saw from a Khalil Shakir because different skill sets, different players. But I expect to see a much improved Keon Coleman in year 2, which means more snaps, being out there more often. And like you said, maybe that means you don't have to bring back an Amari Cooper. But again, if Cooper's willing to take a team-friendly deal, not against that either.
Thank you so much for watching on this Thursday afternoon. We heard from Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott today, and we're going over some of the big takeaways from those press conferences, a little bit more to come, and obviously much more to come over the next couple of weeks as we transition into the off season. Looking back at that Chiefs game, we'll do a little bit of a bigger, deeper dive too at some point once I'm back to full health. So Mark Bouchard, one of our insiders, one of our regulars with the super chat. Hey, Matt and Ryan, proud to be part of the Shout family. Michelle and I love coming in from Syracuse for the live shows at Wingnut. Stay tuned for the next Wingnut show. I believe it'll be at the new location right by the airport there on Genesee. So stay tuned for that info. It's coming soon. If you want to become an insider and get locked in for the offseason, obviously we're going to start putting out a lot of our thoughts on potential free agent additions, potential trade candidates, and as we work toward the combine, some draft stuff. Text 716-528-6727 or go to joinsubtext.com/shoutbuffalobills. 2-week free trial, $3.99 a month after that. And the Shout text line is brought to you by Carrie C. Byer, attorney with the law offices of Francis M. Litro, located at 237 Main Street in Buffalo, New York. If you or someone you know is seriously injured, give them a call, 716-852-1234, or check out litrolaw.com. Where do you want to go next, Ryan?
I think there's a certain coach I want to talk about, Matt, that you brought up specifically at the presser today. That is the one thing that really left me baffled today.
Yeah, so Sean McDermott remains confident in Matthew Smiley, and we'll get into some of the reasoning behind it and whether or not he is smart for that stance. But I asked him if he's bringing back Matthew Smiley as a special teams coordinator, and he said indeed he plans to. He's committed to that. And a lot of Bills fans were flabbergasted on social media with that news, because I think a lot of people thought, without him making a move during the season, that once the season ended, it was time to move in a different direction on special teams. And what I guessing, based on Sean McDermott's comments, this has to do with is a big turnover in terms of like core special teams guys the last offseason, this season. So guys like Saran Neal, Tyler Metakavich, guys that have been here for a long who is it? Dotson. Yeah. And so those guys are gone, and now you have to fill in all these new holes and some big gaps this season. And so I think that he's expecting a big jump into next year with Matthew Smiley remaining on staff. Whether or not that's the right decision remains to be seen. I was a bit surprised, because I thought that would be one move that the Bills made before next season.
Yeah, that was the one coach that I had them moving on from at the end of the season. The coverage units just were not good enough this season, in my opinion. I know Tyler Bass turned it around in the postseason, went perfect on his field goals and extra points. I thought Sam Martin had a nice turnaround too, but as a whole, there was a lot of weaknesses on special teams. Big blocked punt in that Rams game that pretty much led to that loss. Those were the points, the difference in that game. You look at the fake punt against the Broncos that the Bills were just asleep at the wheel for, and I know they ended up winning that game 31-7. But still, when you're going against a Sean Payton team, you have to know that fakes are not only likely going to happen, but are probably going to happen at least once per game in a big game like that. So it's baffling to me too, because you said it was baffling to the fan base. I just feel like there's better options out there. I think Sean McDermott is loyal to a fault, and this is one of those times where we're seeing it firsthand.
So Walter says that he disagrees about being surprised bringing back Smiley because the head coach has a history of poor decision making. In terms of coach hires, I got to disagree, Walter, because I think first and foremost, one of the most important hires that this regime has made was Brian Daboll as the offensive coordinator, pivoting off of Dennison in year one and getting a guy in here to help build the foundation for your young quarterback in Josh Allen. So I think ding, 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 I give him 4 ticks just off the jump from that. I also think that when he was hired initially, hiring Leslie Frazier as an experienced guy with former head coaching experience was a stellar move. I think when they moved on from Frazier, when it meant like, okay, the defense has kind of reached a plateau, the whole 13 seconds debacle, McDermott put it on himself. He was the head coach and he called the defense. And I thought the defense was really good under those circumstances. The problem is Sean McDermott learned over the course of that season, I think, he wasn't going to be able to sustain that long term, having the hand in the defense while trying to run the entire operation. And so he pivoted. He gave the job to Bobby Babich, which I think for the most part did a pretty good job this season. And I also think, and I know fans don't like to hear this, the Bills in pretty much every possible way overachieved in 2024.
They did.
So were there problems with the way that Chiefs game went? And should they have done a few different things to get over the hump? 100%. But I don't think, I think we could say that while at the same time saying Babich was a really good hire. I think Babich was a really good defensive coordinator in a lot of ways, especially considering what all the pieces that they lost on defense and the halftime adjustment piece specifically.
Great.
And I think moving off of Ken Dorsey when he did and giving the job to Brady and then keeping him on as the full-time offensive coordinator was also a really good move by McDermott. So I think, I don't know, I think you're missing the mark a little bit there, Walter.
And Brady's only going to get better. And I know maybe next season's his last season here if they have a similar type of year. Babich is only going to get better in terms of the feel of the game, the big moments, when to call blitzes, when to play zone, when to play man. We saw a mixture of that. A lot more of the intertwining of the two than we've seen in years past under McDermott. You look at the coordinators, another coach that they had here for a while was John Butler, who was phenomenal. They lose Butler. I feel like Jamil Adai had a really nice season this year with the personnel he worked with. Benford taking that next step in his game. Looking at, even the safety play with Taylor Rapp. I thought Rapp answered a lot of questions this year. Hamlin had a really nice season. They've had good coaches on both sides of the ball. Aaron Cromer, obviously, bringing him in to coach this offensive line. They're not just 5 deep across the starting unit. They have so much depth. He does, in my opinion, have a very good track record when it comes to a lot of the other spots. It does. I'll be the first to say, though, that, yeah, Smiley's the one where I really thought that this was going to be it for him at the end of the season. And if the Bills come out and they add a few more veterans to the special teams unit and that fixes all the issues, I'll be the first to say I was wrong. But I just have not been impressed with Smiley during his tenure here in Buffalo.
No, I agree. And I think that there's also another piece of the Smiley part of it. I was just pushing back a little bit on the McDermott hiring, and people are pushing back in the comments, Dominic specifically, about the Bills defense being good this season. I think there's an argument there to say that it wasn't the same defense that it's been. And even McDermott mentioned that he didn't think that the defense played as well as it had in previous seasons. But I also think that there was a huge personnel shift in like what they were doing. I don't think that you could have all pros at every position. We've talked about this on the podcast before, and sometimes you got to fill in certain spots. And I think in moments they did do a pretty good job. I think next year is going to be a little bit better of an evaluation piece for Babich. The thing about Smiley that I want to bake in here is he goes back to the 13 seconds, debacle, right? Like he was the assistant special teams coordinator under Heath Farwell, who ended up taking kind of the brunt of the responsibility in that moment. He ends up moving on, going to Jacksonville, and then you just, promote from within. I don't know if we've seen enough over the course of time from Smiley to say that they have the right guy in that spot. And I think in a lot of ways, if the Bills do have to make a move at special teams coordinator next season, it kind of is going to be in a spot where that's not a great place to be, knowing how hard it is to shift things in season. What you do to the players having to kind of learn an entire new scheme or a new message, you better be darn sure that Smiley's the guy if you're going to keep him on going into next season.
Yeah, because like you said, if you are in the middle of the year and it's not working, the replacements aren't necessarily going to be available, good outside replacements, and you're likely promoting from within, which might just, again, be repeating that cycle over and over again. The Broncos special teams coach that was let go because someone in the comments said, Ryan said there's some better options out there. That was a top 10 unit, and he let him go at the end of the season. I know there was the blocked kick in that Broncos game against the Chiefs, but he had an unbelievable year. Would have liked to seen him considered. Some other special teams coaches too around this league, but the Broncos one was the one that stuck out in my mind. So there were options. The Bills are deciding, though, to stay with Matthew Smiley, right or wrong.
All right. Thank you so much for watching here on this Thursday, January 30th. Let's get into a couple more pieces of today's pressers before we get out of here. I don't have very much time left with this voice, unfortunately. But we'll be back next week. We'll be back and better than ever to kind of do a deep dive and see where we are with everything. Dalton Kincaid, I thought it was interesting that Brandon Beane said, listen, he's got to work on his play strength, right? Like he comes in the league, he doesn't have the size that, a lot of some of these other tight ends do. I mean, you look at a Travis Kelce, you look at a Brock Bowers and a Sam Laporta, some of these traditional bigger bodied, tight ends. And even a guy like Dawson Knox, who wasn't a tight end his whole career. I just think that the body makeup allows him to be a little bit more available. And this is a guy that dealt with some injury issues of his own early on in his career. That's an area where they need Dalton Kincaid to get better. And I think that if he's able to really focus on his body and put on some weight, put on some muscle over the course of the offseason, that changes the game in terms of what the expectations can be for him in year 3. And I'm not closing the door on Dalton Kincaid being a big time player in this offense. And I think in a lot of ways they need him to be, but I think that's a bona fide, no doubt about it, non-negotiable factor going into next season. He's got to get bigger and he's got to be stronger going into next year.
He needs that for the receiving ability, and he also needs that for the blocking ability. If he wants to be on the field, see a significant uptick in his snaps, he needs that for so many reasons. We've seen the way that the Bills want their tight ends to be able to block, the growth that Knox has made in that area. Knox is not an unbelievable blocker, but he's night and day from where he was when he first came into this league from Ole Miss in terms of, what you were going to get from him. They need Dalton Kincaid to do the same thing. They need that play strength to get up. They need the blocking to get better. If he improves his strength, that also helps him in terms of the contested catches, you would think. Obviously, the knee is the biggest thing here, getting him healthy there and making sure he's ready to go next season.
You're dealing with a lot over there. You're dealing maybe with more than I'm dealing with. Is that one's Honey, right?
That one's Honey. They're both on my lap, but Honey was getting a little fidgety, I guess. Reggie is hogging the lap though, so I get
there you
it.
go. All right. Well, Reggie's doing his part there, so I appreciate that. So we got to Kincaid. I want to get to got a super chat here over on YouTube. First 4 picks defense, Keon and Kincaid step it up. I do think that there needs to be some defensive focus in this draft. I think about the McDuffie draft and thank you for the super chat for the Chiefs. I mean, they hit on some really key defensive pieces in that draft. And, they took Karlaftis. Like if you look at just the side by side of some of the swings that they've taken and when they've taken them, similarly to the Bills, I mean, McDuffie to Elam and Karlaftis to Epinesa are 2 like really easy comparisons, right? Or maybe you could do Karlaftis to Rousseau and then it's a little bit closer. But either way, I do think that the Bills, they really need to hit this draft in so many different ways. This has got to be one where you look back at it and six of the 9 or whatever it ends up being, how many draft picks you hit on. I want to get, we'll talk more about that as we get closer to the draft, but let's spend a few minutes on James Cook because I want to run this back really quick because I asked Sean McDermott about that last sequence. The Bills get the ball back and a lot's been made of this over the course of the last 5 days, right?
Right.
The defense gives up 32 points, but the Bills have the ball with 3:33 left with a chance to win the game. And I am on the side of things where I think the defense needs to do more to keep the Chiefs, who didn't score 30-plus points all season, under that total. I think on the road at Arrowhead, 29 points should be enough to win. I think if you're living in a world where you're asking Josh Allen to play Superman in every possible moment of every game against this Chiefs team for the rest of time, it's just not a fair proposition from my point of view, as good as Josh Allen is. And we can get into like what else they need on defense. And I think that there's merit there. But what I don't think is a place you want to be as a team is not being able to recognize a moment and then adjusting in that moment. We talk so much about the halftime adjustments that Joe Brady has made this season and the really good, I think, aggressiveness that Sean McDermott has shown at times, especially in playoff games.
Yeah.
James Cook is having the game of his life, Ryan. The game of his life. Sean McDermott said today, James Cook was not injured to his knowledge down the stretch. Now, historically, traditionally in this season, 2-minute offense would mean Ty Johnson, their third down back, their pass catching back, gets on the field. I get all that. And I think Ty Johnson is more than capable of making plays. But in that moment, you have to have the wherewithal and the understanding that Cook has been your best player in that game. He needs to be on the field.
Yeah.
He needs to be on the field in all these different kinds of moments. Did you hear? I wish I had the video right now of Sean McDermott talking about James Cook from that game today when we asked him about him. He raved about James Cook like I've almost never heard him rave about a player. He said the mentality on the sideline, the way that he was talking to him, obviously the performance, and to just not go to him on the final drive, that just didn't hold up for me.
No, and again, Cook is a blocker. It's not necessarily the greatest strength, and that's another thing Ty Johnson does well, but there is the mentality of ride the hot hand. And no hand was hotter on this Bills offense than James Cook, the way he was running the ball, catching the ball. Really could have used him in those pivotal moments, especially when you had a chance to win the game late. And when he's on the sideline, and especially on those last few plays, it's very confusing because he was your best player against Kansas City. There's no doubt about it. No receiver, no tight end, no running back. I'd argue he's even better than Josh Allen in that game. You need your stars on the field in meaningful moments, and they kind of missed the boat on that. I love what I saw from him, though, and not just in that game, but this overall season. He has swayed my opinion. I've done a 180 in terms of do you pay a second deal to running backs? In his case, yes. You look at what the Derrick Henrys, the Saquon Barkleys of the world have done this season for their respective teams, even a Joe Mixon in Houston. Backs can matter in systems. And we saw the balanced offense of the Bills and how they were able to attack teams. Cook needs to be part of this for the long term here in Buffalo. And that's a deal they need to figure out and get done.
You mentioned the pass blocking issues that sometimes he faces. And I agree, Ty Johnson is a better pass blocker. But who's to say that you have to line him up in the backfield?
Right.
I mean, I don't think you have the kind of wide receiver core where you can't get James Cook on the field with Ty Johnson in some type of setup. And honestly, in the way that the Bills were moving the ball, some of those screenplays and all those kinds of, you got to be able to dial stuff up for your best player in those moments. And I don't really even want to hear the excuse that it's not something that is part of the regular offense. Like sometimes you just got to put the ball in the guy's hands that you believe can make a play. And I don't think you can make an argument for any other player on that offense should have had the ball in their hands outside of Josh Allen than James Cook in that moment.
And I love your point about lining him up at wide receiver, because what did we hear from Greg Rousseau and some of the defenders after the game? The Chiefs ran some stuff that we've never seen before, weren't ready for it, weren't prepared for it. Bills could have done the same exact thing. They could have lined up James Cook at wide receiver, had Ty Johnson in the backfield, given the Chiefs something to think about, something new, a new wrinkle. And then obviously if they could implement that in a way, that would have been even better. But you have to be willing to go deep into your bag in these games and get your best players out there on the field at all times. So hopefully this is something that Joe Brady can learn from. Bobby Babbage too, because, on the defense side of the ball, sometimes they went to man and it just did not go well. I think that's part of a personnel issue with the bodies that they had, the guys that they had at that point. I like the willingness to adjust from man to zone, but I think too, he's going to learn in those moments in terms of having your best players out there and depending on what you're seeing on the other side of the ball.
Yeah, and I know that there were some limitations to the way they built the roster because of the dead cap with Diggs, and they didn't have a lot of money, so I think probably attracting some veterans probably wasn't as easy as maybe in some years past, but they kind of went away from how they've always done it in terms of the defensive backs, specifically the corners, where there just wasn't a lot of veteran depth at all. I mean, you literally put yourself in a spot where Kaiir Elam was going to have to be the top backup for most weeks. And most weeks he wasn't even active in the second half of the season because of special teams. And that's another situation that I think that they got to be able to kind of get away from next year because, depending on what, and they're going to have to, and Brandon Beane even mentioned this today, like corner is going to be a position they look long and hard at because Rasul Douglas is a free agent. I don't know if you even want to consider bringing him back, depending on what the cost would be. Now, he didn't have an interception this year, so maybe he's the veteran backup next season at this stage of his career, and because he knows the defense, and you go out and draft somebody hoping to win the job, and you have a little bit of a fallback. I don't know what it looks like with Kaiir Elam. I would probably be in the camp of moving on at this point.
Right.
But again, what are you going to get for him? And it is pretty cheap labor. I got to look at his contract. I think he might be up to like $4 or $5 million. So maybe not cheap labor, depending on where that's at.
I think both parties are in for a fresh start. You got to move on at this point. It's just not working in Buffalo. That's clear as day. Jamil Adai really did a nice job of working with him this summer, really trying to coach him up, being right there with him in his kind of his back pocket almost all camp, but it just didn't pay off in those meaningful moments. So, if you were to go spend in free agency on one position, I'd probably argue cornerback should be it. You're not going to be able to spend the big money on those edge rushers, the premier edge rushers. You could swing a trade, though, for like Hendrickson maybe, who's getting big money, but that's your Bill's best route of probably getting an edge rusher is via trade. But at cornerback, you could probably find a good veteran that fits your system. I saw someone in here say DJ Reed. I think Reed's going to get paid a lot of money. I think he's one of the better corners in this draft or in this free agency class, but maybe I'll be wrong on that. But yeah, find someone that Bobby Babbitt, Sean McDermott feel are going to fit this system, fit the scheme, add a guy in the mid rounds again. You saw the way that they developed Christian Benford. They saw something in his game that has really transitioned him to becoming a cornerback one. It's not always that easy to find those day 3 picks and hit on them like that. But middle rounds, there's got to be some guys that you like in these draft classes. Add some defensive tackles. I believe it's Daniel Jeremiah. Jeremiah has 15 defensive tackles in his top 50. That shows you how deep that group is in this year's draft. And BPA in terms of first round. As much as I'd like a defensive tackle, maybe you have to go a different position there depending on what's available. Safety would be a great first round pick. You mentioned Brian Branch recently, I think, to the insiders, and you sit back and you look at that guy and how he's sitting around in these drafts, and the top safeties always seem to fall. You had a player like that, kind of like how Kyle Hamilton fell a few years before that. You add the top safety to this defense, and that goes a long way as well.
Thank you so much for hanging out with us on this Thursday. We'll be back with so much more in the weeks to come. Stay tuned. I'm going to get my voice back 100%. We'll be fully locked in and loaded as we move towards the NFL Combine later this month. We'll start to put some of our free agency thoughts in the Insider text line. So you want to sign up for that. 716-528-6727. We'll make you a big part of the show this offseason as well. Bring you onto the podcast. We'll do a lot of different things with that. And Valentine's Day is coming, February 14th. So head on over to Tops and check out their Valentine's Day specialty items. You can get birthday cake pops, $6.99 a piece. Bakery personal message cookie cakes, $4.59 each. 8x8 chocolate chunk cookie cake, $7.49. Top cinnamon buns, $5.99 each. Do you want to give something special for someone special in your life? Northland Mini Rose Miler, 58-4 inch, $4.99 each. Get the entire rose bouquet, $19.99 at Tops right now. What do you got going on for Valentine's Day, Ryan?
I haven't made the plans just yet. Usually go out to a nice restaurant in the area. We'll figure that off. I think I'm off that week from school too, which is going to be nice. So maybe a little getaway somewhere. We'll see. We'll see.
Look at you. You're such a romantic. All right. For Ryan Talbot, I'm Matt Parrino. We'll see you next time, everybody. Take care.